All right, I'm going to get started as people are continuing to jump on. Thank you all very much for joining in this conversation. I'm Heather Shank, the city planner for the city of Concord. Most of you know me, hopefully. And I'm joined with Kelsey Morrow and Lee Einsweiler with Code Studio from Austin, Texas. So today we are going to talk about phase 2 of the zoning code update. But first, I just want to sort of orient you to the process. So we've been working for a few years on phase 1, and we kicked off phase 2 several months ago, preparing for this meeting and the process over the next few months. The whole project in general, just to give you a little bit of background for the entire update of the code, was intended to be develop a more developer-friendly code. And what I mean by that is transition to graphics like you're seeing here. These are some examples of some pages to be included in there that hopefully will be more clear and help you get a better sense of the type of development that the community is looking for. It's also intended to streamline smaller projects so we're not capturing quite so much in the cumbersome plan review process, but we're more accurately capturing what really needs to be looked at. Making the dimensional standards more accurately reflect what's on the ground. We noticed in the previous analysis that there was a lot of nonconformity across all the districts in the city. And so we're sort of matching those existing development with the zoning standards and hopefully reducing some of the variances needed. And also addressing housing issues, which are now more pressing than ever, and encouraging redevelopment. So updating codes to do all of those things. So phase 1 and phase 2, phase 1 accomplished all that mostly through for about 90% of the city. Phase 1 looked at areas of the city where there's existing development. We know what it looks like. We know what we want it to look like. We either have vision plans or we have an existing patterns of development to build on. Phase 2 is a little bit different. Phase 2 is actually just looking at, thank you, for looking at targeted districts and areas of the city where redevelopment is needed and or the codes need to be updated. We have new models for housing, new models for commercial development. So we sort of picked a few districts that we wanted to include in these new areas to talk to the community about what do we want to see in the future? What types of housing can we imagine, and what types of corridor development can we create? So there is the 4th district. So again, multi-unit housing is in the green. And those are the areas where we want to look at new housing types. The local commercial development is that sort of brown color. You can see it's highlighting Fisherville and Loudon Road. And then the regional commercial is basically the gateway performance districts that are sort of scattered throughout the city, but really with a focus on the mall and redevelopment of the mall site and codes that will help that to occur. The last one is kind of the most interesting one. So we have an existing district called OFP, which is Office Park Performance. It's not very useful district right now because it's really geared towards creating a type of development that you're not seeing a whole lot of these days. So we took the OFP districts and a few of the industrial areas where we've had some different discussions about what type of development should go there. For instance, up at Whitney Road, in light of all of the development that's happening with the grocery store, we've had a lot of different discussions about what could happen along that Whitney Road extension. The Southern Opportunity Corridor is another one. We have a master plan for that, but a lot of it is not necessarily giving us a guide for how to code that area to create some new types of development. And of course, we have the Gardens Falls. So phase 2 is intended to be a much more targeted process. We already reinvented the wheel, so to speak, in the last few years. And so this is intended to be, can you flip forward to the next screen? Before I go into the timeline. So phase 2 is broken into these 4 steps. So step 1 was preparation, which we've already accomplished. We've been working for a few months on these slides and presentations and targeting these areas. So today we're doing visioning, and that's really showing some different precedents for development for these areas and talking about what you would like to see. Getting some feedback from the community and just saying, hey, do we want to go this direction? Are we happy with where we're at? Do we want to keep going in that direction? Or how does the community want to proceed? So feedback is really important in this phase. And we will have several different strategies or methods for you to provide feedback. So part of our preparation was picking out some, I'm going to say sites, but they're really more like focus areas. And we looked at trying to get a focus area for each of the areas so the consultants can take what we tell them today, go back and basically show us what that would look like on the ground. So they took some relatively large areas and they're going to actually show us, if we were to develop a code to encourage this type of development, how could that be implemented in these areas in Concord? And then based on that feedback, they'll go back and actually write a code, which would be step 4. So forward one slide. So this process is intended to be much quicker. We're in March now, we're doing the visioning, really the tail end of the vision. And then they're going to go back and they're going to be, oh, somebody's muted. Hold on, let me see if I can mute someone. I can't tell right now who's not muted, but they did it. Thank you. So they'll take this visioning that we go through right now, and again, there'll be opportunities for feedback over the next few weeks, and they will start to develop some design concepts to show us what those things would look like on the ground in these focused locations. And then at the end of that process, in around June, the end of June, we're looking at having another one of these web sessions, and then they'll go back and they'll draft the code. So ideally in the end of September, August, September, October is when we'll be presenting the code drafts, and after that, combining it all with the phase 1 and for adoption. So phase 1, I just want to mention, will be a separate process for outreach and feedback. As soon as I'm able to make that public, I'll be having a whole separate series of, both in public and probably online sessions and more targeted towards specific groups, going and talk to people to talk about that. So as you can see, as far as we're concerned, like 90% of the work is done, and we just want to focus on these target areas where we really don't have a vision for future development, or it's not clear what path the community might want to take for those areas, or just keep doing what we're doing. Forward one more slide. So again, I'm about to turn it over to our consultants. What could these 8 places look like in the future? What do we want it to look like? What's our vision for those areas? So again, there'll be some little polls after each of these segments. There's 4 segments, just to remind you, and after each one, there'll be, I'm hoping we'll have time, depending on how the presentation goes, for maybe 5 to 7 minutes after each one, for you to ask questions or have comments, maybe even some interactive discussion. I tried to get all the consultants to participate in this daytime meeting, so you're kind of our guinea pigs, but to see if there's discussion that is relevant to happen, with the professional development community. So there's the polls throughout the web conference, and then at the end there'll be a link to an online. Basically, we're calling it a survey, but it's really an opportunity to either document what you said, or provide more information, or just formally say, this is how I feel about what we did today. And of course, ongoing communication. You can always reach out to me. Email is best, because then you can document what you said or how you felt, but you can always just call me as well. And there'll be opportunities to connect with through either the community or the city website or the project website. So again, feedback is critical in this juncture. So thank you again for participating. With that, I will turn it over to start off on our first focus area to Kelsey and Lee.
Thanks. So the first piece is the multi-unit residential areas of Loudon Road and Fisherville Road. It's really where you see the green in the image. So the green on the map is the kinds of places that we are talking about. And when we look specifically at one, this is Loudon at Eastside Drive. And when you have a chance to look at this, what you're seeing is some challenges from a land use perspective in our minds. There are connections that are missing, both between developments and from the development along Loudon back into the areas behind Loudon. There are traffic issues which are generated principally because of the lack of connections and the lack of an alternate network. Actually, to the south, there is a reasonably good network and other parallel streets, but to the north, there's definitely not. There are use issues. Some of the adjacencies may be considered a little challenging, the kinds of uses that are immediately abutting other uses. There are some questions about transitions related to those uses and transitions in height and intensity back down to the neighborhoods. There are challenges for walkability along Loudoun and East Side especially, but even within the internal streets within the neighborhoods, there's not a great network of sidewalks or bike paths or other connectivity. And finally, there's a bit of a jump from single family all the way up to apartments. And we're missing a lot of housing types that might sit in between, whether that's duplexes or townhouses or other alternatives. So we are principally seeing the two of those. And the issues remain the same when we look at Fisherville Road. This is Fisherville at Borough Road. You can see the self-storage up there. There's the former car wash, former bank, former whatever that sits there. Brand new redevelopment, of course, has occurred right at the corner there at Borough and Fisherville. But there's still a lot of raw land in this area. And so imagining what that could be and what the street could be in the future along here, if it were streetscaped and designed correctly, is another part of the challenge. When we look at the existing conditions in those areas, the multi-unit residential areas are principally buildings lying within a sea of parking. And this is an example on the lower left of the apartments that are off of East Side Drive there. We included a set of new apartments that are near Fisherville. This is actually a nice project in terms of the streetscape and the buildings, but again, not very connected, certainly not connected to the adjacent areas. And these are the kinds of things that cause challenges when we all leave for work at 9 a.m. in the morning, if we're actually not working out of our living rooms anymore. We wanted to show you some alternatives to that. So one of the possible alternatives is an example here in Austin, Texas. This is the former airport site, which was converted into a mixed-use development. And you can see in the upper left a wide variety of housing types showing up there in the image. And many of those then are shown here on the page. So there are townhomes in there. There are small lot single family down in the lower left corner. In the lower right corner is an image of a single family that is actually split into two as a duplex. In addition, the streetscapes there are enhanced for walkability and bikeability. You can see a protected bike lane running along this major street through the development. You can see the street trees coming up. In a few years, those trees will be really gorgeous. In addition, then there are a variety of types that we are seeing. We're seeing apartments and open spaces adjacent to those for those people to recreate in. We're seeing a building in the lower left, which is actually a sixplex, which looks like a very large single family unit for the most part. The one on the bottom right is actually a fourplex built into that sort of mansion house single family model. So there are some alternatives that we might want to consider coding for so that they could become options in the area. Another example, this one from Riverdale Park, Maryland. This is a great example. If you look at the aerial photo on the left, you'll see a wide variety of housing types. All of the skinnier white buildings that look a little bit like zippers, those ones are all townhouses, and you'll see the example of the townhomes on the right. The larger buildings, including the large building in the very lower portion of that photo, include structured parking even to provide additional parking for the site. And these would be also a possibility, 2- and 3-story residential at a much more intense level than you're seeing today. And so we wanted to ask you in a poll here, we're going to pop up a little poll and we hope you'll all answer it. It'll pop up on your screen. And the question is really, which do you prefer, to keep doing what we're doing, like the image on the left from Nashua, New Hampshire, or potentially apply a new alternative like on the right? And if you don't really know what you might want to do, you can say you're unsure.
We're not seeing the poll yet, Lee, just so you know.
Oh, well, some people are answering. Did you not get one, Heather?
I did not get one. I was not invited to the poll.
Apparently not. We'll have to work on that. But I believe most everybody else has had a chance. what we're seeing is a dominant interest in trying a new alternative, but there are some who are not certain. And there are also some who are interested in keeping doing what we're doing. So we'll share those results that we're seeing right now. Hopefully you're seeing that little pop-up that shows the results. 71% suggested try a new alternative, 17% weren't sure, and 13% would like to keep on doing what's being done today. And so we have a second poll for you. So this one is a little bit more in terms of the streets and the connections of the streets. Again, asking whether this kind of disconnected cul-de-sac model that you see along Fisherville Road, or the more connected neighborhoods of West Street, which show up on the right, are a better pattern for the future. So if you could answer that poll as well, we'd appreciate it.
Well, at least you know the city planner's not going to sway the results because I don't get any access to the poll.
And so here's what we're seeing. Again, a dominance, as might be anticipated with a group with your orientation, suggesting a new alternative, but a fair number of people not sure about moving away from the cul-de-sac model, and some who would like to keep doing what you're doing. So a fair spread there. So we'll probably look at making some of these things options, which are available in the future. Before we go into the commercial areas, I wonder if anyone had any thoughts. If you did, if you could just unmute yourself and share your question with us. We're happy to talk briefly about those multi-unit residential things that we just had a look at.
Lee, how many people are taking the poll?
You're muted, Lee, if you just muted
So
yourself.
there are 33 people in the meeting, and about 23 of them answered the poll. And we will be taking this poll again in this evening's meeting and in Thursday evening's meeting. So there'll be a combined set of results eventually.
Lee,
Yes.
this is Steve Henninger. A lot of the green areas are you're showing are pretty solidly developed. Do you see an option for additional development within those areas?
Certainly, and also for phased redevelopment. And some, I have not seen the quality of some of these, but potentially with some, they may need complete redevelopment. But yes, I think there are options all along the spectrum there. Additional buildings, additional connections and improvements to quality of life in those existing locations, the potential for removing some buildings and rebuilding a portion at a time, and the possibility for complete redevelopment.
So
On the north, Lee?
Yes.
Steve Henninger, on the north side of Loudon Road and the south side of Loudon Road, the planning board has and the planning department have tried for many years to get connections. And every time the neighborhoods in the area have fought it, and the council has specifically, and also the planning board has put barriers up. And I live in the north of Loudon Road, and on both sides of my neighborhood, there is actually a gated community on one side, and there was supposed to be a connecting road to go through to East Side Drive, and it was the city actually owned land, and they sold it to a developer who built a house on it to block that. in the, it's been, not been a popular approach in the past. So it's
So
a
I
very,
think that the full conversation needs to be held. You know,
definitely needs to be held,
there
but
is
it's not going to be a simple process.
understood. Yes, thank you.
Hi, Lee.
Yes.
Alan Hirschlag. What sort of role do you think, including mixed income housing, should have in the zoning document, in the planning document?
It's an interesting question. We have worked all across the spectrum from places that have inclusionary zoning. I think we are going to focus a little bit on mixed housing types in hopes of not having that sort of singular monolithic model of the same building, 35 times in development. The ability to perhaps do some townhouses mixed with small apartment buildings, potentially mixed with maybe 6 or 8 plexes. Those kinds of things are more likely to be on our list than anything actually linked to income. But there might be some encouragement about multiple size units, which again would get at some of the question you're asking. I'm not anticipating anything specific which would require mixed income at this point. But if enough people feel strongly about it, clearly it's something we could consider, and we'd have to look at whether we can require it or whether we'd have to incentivize it.
Just a quick comment. Above White Mountain, the new studio apartments there, above White Mountain Coffee, I think they're about 450 square feet, so they're quite small. And you would think, well, that might be an opportunity for a reduced rent or a lower income cost. But my understanding is that those go for over $1,600 a month. So I don't believe that just reducing the size of a unit would necessarily make units affordable for a significant portion of the people in the community. Thanks, Lee.
You're welcome. Thank you. Other questions?
I think Steve made a really excellent point, and I just wanted to respond to that as well about, a lot of those areas that in green that we highlighted being developed. And I think that that's true. We do have areas sort of on the outskirts that are the same district where there's greenfield. So people are coming, for instance, on Breakaday Drive looking for to do multifamily up there. And they're sort of looking to the models either that they've done elsewhere or that we have in Concord and saying, let's do more of this. And we're trying to show some examples of, well, you could do that, or you could do this, which would be a much higher yield density and efficiency of land on that property. So, while some of these sites may or may not redevelop that we have highlighted in green, there are a lot more people even coming as looking at Sheep Davis Road and Pembroke Road, and we need so much housing that people are coming from all directions trying to find sites for housing. So I think that just having these options out there or coding for them in some districts so people see, oh, we could do these mixed types. We could do triplex and townhome and apartments all on this site and integrate them in this way. So yes, those are developed and they may not redevelop for another decade or two, but we also do have a lot of sites that could accommodate, brand new development.
Thanks, Heather. So I'm going to move on to the local commercial areas and share those with you. Again, these are the brownish pieces that you see. So along Loudon Road and Fisherville primarily, a little bit on South Main there. So the Loudon Road piece, again, looking at the local commercial aspect of it, one of the key things is that these areas are they are auto dominated. They are, again, not interparcel connection like some of the other settings like the mall or other places might be. They lack meaningful transitions to the neighborhoods back behind. They continue to, even in somewhat in-town settings like Loudon and East Side, facilitate a sort of auto-oriented and drive-to model, and are not highly walkable or necessarily bikeable, for that matter. The same challenges exist along Fisherville. I guess a couple of other things. There's the new coffee shop at the corner, of course, but there fundamentally are virtually no sidewalks along here, and a challenging place to cycle. The storage is a fairly underutilized parcel of land there. There is substantial acreage there in the south of the storage, and to the west of most of the existing development is zoned for single family and has not been used for many years. So there's lots of opportunity in this area based on those somewhat empty lands that exist there today. So the existing conditions look a little bit like this. On the left, you're seeing Loudon Road at East Side, right there at the corner. Nice landscaping in front. Recent addition of a handicapped ramp, but those sidewalks are still connected directly to the back of the curb and have no protection from the travel lanes, and are therefore a little bit scary. And of course, riding in a bike lane along this road would be equally challenging. Most of Loudon Road is set up with parking lots in front, as you're seeing on the example to the right, where the Olive Garden is sitting back there. We get mostly parking in between the building and the street. On Fisherville, here's the pharmacy up there at Manor Road and Fisherville. And again, you're seeing that model in which really large areas of parking lie between the building and the street. Not a highly walkable model, a drive-to model. On the other side of Fisherville, these are in the right-hand side of the picture, the storage units, and in the left-hand side of the picture, the sort of interesting but strange building that's been renovated a number of times and used for a wide variety of things over the years, and is probably a target for redevelopment someday soon.
I just want to jump in. Can I jump
yes.
in quickly on that? I just want to point out in our favor, in the city of Concord's favor, we just redid Fisherville Road and made some amazing improvements in terms of the, at least putting the bike lanes on there. And we do have sidewalks and crosswalks and things like that. So it's much improved over what it was before. I don't even remember. I'm not even sure I was here before it happened, but significant investment to improve Fisherville Road. So in some ways it's really primed for the next step, which is to, build that streetscape infrastructure out with the rest of the land use and the development patterns, because it's really, did a nice job with redeveloping the actual street.
Good point. So some alternative models. Admittedly, most of these look a little bit more urban, but on the left, you're seeing 1 and 2 stories. On the right, 3 stories of development. The example on the left contains a Whole Foods grocery store. And as the grocery store meets the street, you're seeing that sort of step down in the glassed facade with the entrances. On the right-hand side, you're seeing residential mixed in adjacent to commercial activity. You're seeing a substantial disconnect between the sidewalk and the street, with street trees and planting areas and park benches. So lots of opportunity in that setting for walkers and movement of individuals safely along the street.
Can I also point out, Lee, just on that previous
Yes.
one as well, I'm sorry to jump in, that's a 4-lane road. So that's equivalent to Loudon Road, really, in terms of width and function.
Yes, correct. But quite different in terms of feel for the average, especially pedestrian along the street. An example here in the left of fitting in a small grocery. This is a Lidl grocery fit into this site. And on the right, sort of typical chain store users like Dunkin' Donuts and Subway, set in a slightly more urban setting. It doesn't mean there isn't parking. In both cases, you can see the parking on the sites. In the case of the Dunkin' Donuts, it's back there behind on the right-hand side of the picture. And so it's not that we don't have parking. It's really just that we've given over the front of the building to pedestrian activity and made a much more pleasant atmosphere for people who might be on foot. So we wanted to ask you about some of those ideas. Is the auto-oriented model really the future that we expect to see? Are we interested in a new alternative that brings buildings closer to the street, tucks the parking back behind? So again, we'd like to ask you kind of the same question: which do you prefer, to keep on doing what you're doing today, try some of these new alternatives, or perhaps admit that we're not really sure yet what we might be ready to do? We'll give you just another moment to answer those questions. All right, so the results from this particular one, 74% of the audience suggested to try a new alternative, but 13% of them are suggesting we keep what we're doing, and 13% also suggested they're not certain about which direction we should head. So again, while there's a strong interest in new alternatives, maybe not a 100% slam dunk. We have one last poll on the commercial question, and hint at me what this is. Yeah, so I believe, is that a Dunkin' Donuts in the background? Okay, this one was mostly focused on the fact that there's a Dunkin' Donuts in the background of the first image and in the foreground of the second image. And we're wondering whether that changes anybody's mind about the pattern of development. In this particular, oops, sorry about that. In this particular instance, not everybody was sure that we should try a new alternative. A few more slipped into the keep doing what we're doing and I'm not sure boxes. It's a bit of a toss-up. So I wonder whether anybody had any discussion about the question of these commercial areas. Any questions? Anything they'd like to share?
Al Hirschlag again. So I know we haven't discussed, are you going to be discussing the mall, or could I just make a quick
The
comment?
mall is a separate, it's a separate one, and it'll show up.
All right, so I'll wait then.
Okay, thanks. Others?
Yeah,
Anything about Loudon and
I've-
Fisherville?
I was just wondering, so the examples of the Riverdale, Hattiesburg, Albany, College Park, those all look really similar to the Main Street that we've got out in front of our state capitol. From a planning perspective, what would prevent the zoning that's being done on Main Street from being done on Loudon or Fisherville Road?
Really, there isn't anything preventing it. I do think that the two areas have a slightly different character in that downtown is much more intense, not as you go north and south of downtown necessarily, for which we have tuned up the districts for those areas already in the existing draft. So it could be that one of those districts could actually apply to these areas.
I can also chime in on that. It is intensity, that's part of it, but there's also different uses that are allowed out here than are allowed downtown. You know, a lot of big box uses are allowed out here, and as Lee showed, some of those can be incorporated into these new styles, new types. But I think that we're trying to propose something in this area that would allow people to do these types of new development, not necessarily eliminate other types of development. You know, so ideally we would continue to allow, if people still want to drive-throughs, continue to still allow that. But right now, if someone wanted to do any of the new things that we were talking about, they wouldn't be able to. So things like setbacks and locations of certain things, you know, loading lanes, there's a lot of regulations in place that would prohibit anyone from creating anything like this. So, you know, if people want to try a new alternative, you know, if for instance, nobody said, oh, I don't want to do what we keep doing, I want to do all this new stuff. You know, we can write a code to make it harder to do some of the stuff that we find maybe less attractive or more vehicular oriented, or we could just keep it the way it is so that they can do that, but create something that would allow them to do these other types of development if they wanted to.
So if I could just chime in again, Alan Hirschlag, just because I'm checking try a new alternative doesn't necessarily I'm agreeing with the specific alternative that's being shown.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to add something in. Can you hear me, Jeff Lewis?
Yes.
I think what Heather just mentioned, I think is very important, because I wasn't even considering that perspective. I'm just considering both of these, Fisherville and Loudon Roads, as like the entire corridor being redeveloped. But we're thinking just, you know, one project at a time and giving people the flexibility to do this. I think it's the way to look at it. That definitely changes my perspective. So I think that'd be just important to kind of focus on what Heather was just talking about in the presentations here. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
I agree with Jeff. This is Tim Thompson, especially when you're doing the presentations to the general public, to make sure that that's clear, because it wasn't clear. And I was thinking along the same lines as Jeff was initially. So that was helpful clarification.
Okay.
Yeah, again, I apologize, just a quick one. So my understanding when we went to look at form-based code was that it would give us a lot more alternatives. It would help to improve the aesthetics in a manner that could preserve the history and character of the community, while expanding the types of uses in the different zoning districts. And that is one of the things that was most appealing to me about moving forward with the new code.
I appreciate that. I hope we will have done that by the time you see the draft. Other questions or comments? Let's move on and talk about the regional commercial. So the regional commercial does include Steeplegate Mall, and it includes the other big box areas. So Fort Eddy as an example. There's a few others around town. Almost all of them are Zone Gateway Performance today. Here's everybody's poster child, of course, DeMonte Drive. It's a beautiful example of a big street that can move cars in and out of the mall site. But as you can see from where the cars are parked now, only the big boxes that sit outside the mall property itself are doing well. And even those are not necessarily filling their parking lots. So there's a fair amount of opportunity in this area to think new thoughts about what could happen here. Again, here's the existing condition, a fairly significant road running down through the center. This is the Spine Road on the left, DeMonte, and then a shot of Steeplegate, just kind of illustrating the scale of parking that was once envisioned as necessary for that use. This is Fort Eddy on the left, and again closer up on the right, to give you a sense of sort of the scale of parking areas and the level of activity associated with these places. All of them that we've been looking at are singly commercial. They don't really have office activity in them. They don't really have residential activity in them. They are certainly not what anybody would consider mixed use. So that's maybe one of the questions that we should be asking. Some prototypes of alternatives. Blueback Square was, car dealers and other things. Those of you who visited Blueback now know that it's a lovely walkable place today, 20 plus years later. It has perhaps as much intensity as your downtown has. It's got structured parking and buildings at the same heights as your downtown. And so some consideration should be given to whether the mall site can really support those kinds of densities and intensities. We anticipate, though, that more likely some of the other sites might redevelop sooner. So what kind of options do we want to provide them? Certainly, we'd like to see some mixed use, and that means getting some upper stories that we can put either office or residential or other compatible uses in. Something that would have some local character to it, something that would be evocative of other buildings and especially the older development in Concord, and something that would be dense enough to be an efficient, walkable kind of a place. That would likely require over time structured parking and new streets in place of what we have today, which are mostly open parking lots and drive aisles. Here's another example, the town center in Annapolis, Maryland. On the left, you see 2004, not so terribly long ago, doesn't feel quite so long ago. And on the right, 2021. So this looks a little bit like your mall on the left. You can see some big boxes surrounding the mall area. The mall itself is a little smaller than Steeplegate, but you can see the lovely development that was created here, new streets and streetscape, a series of roundabouts that manage the pace of traffic through the development proper, structured parking, providing for a lot of activity on the site. And that looks like this today. It has a very active public realm for people walking and biking through the area. It has, as you see on the bottom image, some small box stores. In this case, you're looking at a Bed Bath & Beyond in the back of the image there. It has multiple stories of activity, in some cases, even 2 stories of commercial activity, and residential and office above. This is one other example alternative. This is Riverdale Park. Again, looking at this, looking at the variety of housing types that sit on that site. In this particular case, you're seeing townhouses in the bottom right, but there are also apartments on the site. And while there are single-story retail, it is embedded on a street grid that doesn't exist at the mall or in the big box areas today. And so again, we wanted just to ask you whether we, in these large big box areas and the mall area, want to continue the path that we're on, sort of the auto-dominated mode on the left, or consider a new alternative that makes a true walkable place using new streets and new organization of development on the sites. So it looks like this time less uncertainty about the mall area, suggesting that perhaps this is an area where it's time to try a new alternative. A little bit of interest in doing what we're doing, and a few people not sure, but a much more dominant response. I wanted to share one more poll with you here. Again, you know, thinking about this activity, an example of a relatively nice, decently landscaped example of a center on the left versus the more compact, denser development on the right. Are we going to continue on with the single-use development you see on the left, or move towards a mixed-use model in these regional commercial areas? So again, it looks a little bit like people are interested in a new alternative, though some aren't really sure about that more dense environment and the multi-story mixed use. And there is some interest in continuing what we're doing today. So anybody, I believe there was at least one comment on the mall area that someone wanted to share, or on the adjacent big box areas.
Thanks, Lee. This is Alan Hirschlag. So without going down the road that Tuscan Village has the model that they followed, which I think is a little bit overly contrived. I think one of the worst things that could happen is if the mall was broken up and redeveloped piecemeal. And then also we have the issue of how involved should the city become? Should we once again purchase properties and try to redevelop them? I don't think we've had a great record with that. So my question is can the city encode a comprehensive development plan or a site-specific type plan into the zoning code that would more clearly or more specifically direct the development? And I know the argument against that, and I'm sorry to go on a little bit here, the argument against it is that, well, if a developer comes in and it doesn't make sense for them financially at the time, then they would walk away. But my thought is at least the city would have control. And if somebody came in and said, geez, that's not exactly what we had in mind, or it doesn't make financial sense to us, what about this? Then the city at least has the option to say, yeah, that makes sense to us too, or no, let's try to go in a different direction. So the question is how specific, how much of a comprehensive development type plan can the city encode into a zoning ordinance? Thanks, Lee.
So it's quite clear that cities have the ability to go all the way to what sometimes is called a regulating plan, showing where future streets might exist, showing what intensities are. You can set minimum heights as well as maximum heights. You can require the parking to be in certain locations on the site. So you could be quite prescriptive about what happens. I think one of the key things that we're thinking about when we look at mall sites, and we've done some mall redevelopment retrofit projects in other settings, one of the key things to us is getting a network really of blocks and streets. And so setting standards for that is very important. But then also making certain that we have the flexibility where things might be non-conforming to the new zoning to keep them active and in use, so that over time, the new thing can build out. Once upon a time, we would have raised something all the way to the ground and built it all anew. And that's really not the most common model in the current environment. Many people are trying to keep active uses going as they renovate or as they build new buildings. And so it's more likely that we would be infilling and building block networks and building structured parking over time in an incremental manner. And that's one of the key things that we could focus on and code for and make certain happens, while still having a fair amount of flexibility for a vision that is office dominated, commercially dominated, totally mixed, residentially dominated, anywhere along that spectrum. if there's no more information that the city chooses to provide. Typically also the companion to that work is a vision of some sort for the larger area. And that would be a small area planning exercise or perhaps part of your next update to the comprehensive plan.
Hi, Lee. This is Nick Gold, and a question for you. Certainly hear the theme of walkability and increased density with today's presentation. Given that this is New Hampshire and half the year folks aren't apt to walk just because of weather constraints, what's the expectation to offset the parking demand? Is the idea that we're going to plan for parking garages, or are we trying to retrain people's thinking and how they're connecting through the community?
So I think you have a significant challenge associated with that because you're not a transit-rich setting, and therefore there are no alternatives in bad weather. If you're on foot, you're simply going to be unhappy. I grew up in Minneapolis, however, and up until we got the Skyways, which was late in my childhood, we just bulled it out. People do walk. I've been to your lovely town in the middle of the winter, and people do walk, and we ought to give them the opportunity to. But I believe that especially in these settings, which are not immediately adjacent to any high density sink of residential right this minute, that for a fair while they'll need a significant amount of parking. So those questions about kind of phasing out parking are somewhere in your future. On the other hand, if we could get a more meaningful node here, we might find ourselves with something like a shuttle system or something else, which moved you from downtown offices and other activities, back out to here for residences, or vice versa. Maybe you live downtown and you're going to come back out here and work. So there are chances for that more micro mobility to support things, I suspect, in the slightly longer run. But first, this sort of node of development has to become more intense than it is today. So it's got a while to redevelop, I think, before we begin to worry about any substantial reduction in parking.
Also, in the meantime, just shipping our
Can I jump onto that as well, Lee?
behind the buildings.
Yeah.
There's usually, these types of developments usually have a mix of surface and structured parking. So you can see on the one on the right where there are smaller lots interspersed across the site. They also usually utilize on-street parking, which is very different from the way we handle these commercial corridors right now. But parking on the street and surface parking, and I mean, it's true. It's difficult to make a significant progress without a structured parking. So I don't know what strategies that the city has for any type of assistance with that. I mean, a lot of the development downtown is successful because we put those, is assisted by the fact that we have those parking structures downtown. So, I don't want to call it an elephant in the room, but it is, if you look at the cost of the parking structure, but then the tax value or even the value to the property owner and their pro forma for all of this development, these people are constructing these things for a reason. They're not losing money on them.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? All right, I'm going to move on to the final segment that we've got, which is really about those industrial flex areas that Heather began talking about earlier. And we wanted to touch on two of these areas. One down in what we call the southern OCP, south of the gas holder building there, in that little bit of a mess of train tracks and everything else. And then north along Whitney Road, not in the existing development site, but really to the south of that. So the southern OCP, I mean, one of the key things here is that there are opportunities. Main Street runs along the west side, but you're bisected by a rail line. And on the east side, you are blocked from river access in many ways, based on the transportation system that's coming by there, the big road. And so getting around this area, oh, and I forgot to mention a bunch of wetlands. So there's some real site challenges in this site, and that's not even looking at the topography of it quite yet. In Whitney Road, the site that we're mostly interested in is this area that's kind of south of Wheelabrator and up on top of the bluff. It's a fascinating area. It has beautiful views, but it's right now served by not much of a gravel road kind of up over the hill where there used to be a road in the old days. So here's the southern OCP kind of existing conditions. Much of it is older buildings that could be rehabilitated. Some of it a little bit abandoned and just left to sit for a lot of years. The parking areas are somewhat informal at this point in time, and potentially a lot of activity in them that isn't appropriate if we're trying to turn this into a mixed use area. And by that, I just mean that people want striped parking spaces and clean and neat settings in order to use many of those areas. In Whitney Road, really, it's the area behind the Concord Sports Center. We just kind of put this to remind you of where we're talking about. And this is a view kind of snagged out of Google of what it looks like to look from the top of the bluff, across the river to the other side. It's a pretty amazing experience. You're seeing the gravel road down there cutting through the properties we're talking about in the bottom of the picture. So a couple of examples, again, one from Austin. Apologize for the Austin examples, but we know them best since we're here. This is an area called St. Elmo. It is a former manufacturing site. It's a bunch of metal and some slightly older, higher quality warehouses that has very quickly turned over from just a first beer brewery and then later a distillery moving in to becoming an entire sort of entertainment location, including even a Tesla sales facility tucked into one of the buildings. So it is mixed use redevelopment, but it still maintains its industrial character and really somewhat industrial uses. The distillery is distilling on site, the brewery is brewing on site. But on the same site, you're getting this kind of housing you see in the bottom image with live workspaces on the ground floor that allow for small retail or other activity, including artistic activity in those spaces. Lots of combination employment and entertainment kinds of spaces that draw people to this area, especially as you can see in the decent weather. Another example from Asheville, North Carolina, the River Arts District. We worked in the River Arts District a number of years ago, and there are some absolutely fabulous buildings. The industrial reuse, the wedge on the top left there, actually is a building that's entered on the upper floors from one side of the building and on the lower floors from the other side of the building, really handling topography exceedingly well. Just a good example of how to make that work. It's an arts and tourism area, and it's intended to remain that way over time. So many of these older buildings are likely to stay, but there are some redevelopment sites, and you can see an apartment and live work building, a new one in the bottom corner. That was one of the first redevelopments after our new code was in place. And you can see based on that site that you're getting an improved street feel. If you look at the streetscape in the top right image, you'll see the cracked sidewalks, et cetera. And those are beginning to be replaced over time as development happens in some of these buildings. Another example of mixing light industrial with all kinds of things, including residential and office, and embracing the history of a site is this example from Camp North End, which is in Charlotte. You can see downtown Charlotte in the background of the picture to kind of give you a sense of where this is located. There are lots and lots of flexible spaces here that can be opened up for activities, but they can also be part of the light industrial activity that takes place on the site on a day-to-day basis. And finally, the Music Factory if you were really thinking about an entertainment venue, you have some possible locations in this district that might well make a good outdoor entertainment venue as part of a redevelopment. You're seeing the industrial flex on the top left image. The curved portion in the right-hand portion of the site is the amphitheater that you're seeing in the bottom of the picture. And you'll see the plaza that you see in the top right picture with the little pool in it in the sort of bottom center of the picture on the top left. And so a good example of reuse of existing buildings, some infilling activity that makes it possible to run all of these engaging things in those outdoor flexible spaces when there's an opportunity and the weather makes it all right. So we wanted to talk a little bit in these flex areas. Do we really need the existing flex uses to remain there? Or do we want to consider allowing new uses to be created in these areas and a mixture of uses to begin to happen over time? So we'd love you to answer our question of which you prefer, the kind of single use industrial characteristics or the possibility of a new mixed use setting in these places.
I just want to remind everyone that we're talking about basically the South End industrial area. It's where I live. The OFP district, which is over kind of Pembroke Road near the industrial district, the formal industrial district. And then the only real industrial parcel that we have in this is the Whitney Road piece, which, you know, the regular, just to clarify, the regular industrial districts that we have are staying the same uses and design standards and all, basically it's the same from existing code as what's in the new code. This is specifically looking at the Whitney Road district because of all the development that's happening up there and the discussions that people have brought to us, as well as the OFP district, which is a little bit obsolete, and the OCP district, which you know, people are interested in redeveloping, but there's not necessarily an existing district that makes more sense to be there.
So I'm seeing
Lee,
a
where did the auto repairers and the others, that left picture behind Snell, where do they go?
well, so auto repair is not necessarily a problematic use, but it doesn't always have to look like this one. So that's part of the issue is management of the site itself. Auto repair is allowed on the fringes of the downtown, for example, even. And there are several facilities there today that are at least slightly better looking than this image on the left. So we aren't intending to drive those out of town. There will be a place for them.
So if I can, Alan Hirschlag again. In the late 70s, I was out in California, Southern California. And I remember going to what I thought was just a shopping center. There was mostly individual, some attached businesses, but it's a mix of commercial and office and retail. And as I walked by, I was surprised to see in this area an auto body shop. And the only reason that I knew it was an auto body shop was because of the sign. There was no storage, there was no odor or anything. So again, that's when form-based code came along. That's I immediately thought back to that trip I had out in California around 1977 and said, yeah, that works. If there's enough codes to make sure that those businesses can be compatible, those uses can be compatible without interfering with one another.
My favorite example was the Sears Auto Store in the bottom of a parking garage, which seemed like a reasonable place to do oil changes, et cetera.
I just want to point out also that we're not suggesting that any of the existing uses no longer be permitted. That's not what we're suggesting. I think this might be the back of the Sannel property, Sannel Auto Parts property. They had to get several variances to put in the brewery and the I can't remember what the other thing was, the brewery and is it a restaurant? Yeah, the rib place and the brewery. we're suggesting to change the zoning to make those uses allowed by right in that district. So they wouldn't have needed to get those variances for those uses. That's really what we're talking about, allowing more uses in these districts to help the property owners redevelop in ways that may be, exciting, engaging, positive for the community and for themselves.
This is Craig Tufts. I just put in the chat a comment, and everybody happened to start talking about it right away. But I like having a lot of those small businesses down there. I can walk down and drop off my car to get it inspected and come back home, and it's a lot of low rent, cool shops down there. And I think it's great to be able to have the community to evolve around it and allow some interesting things without having to, move all those buildings to put all those businesses to put in something bigger and better. So I think it's a good approach for that spot.
So I will say that our experience is that over time, these places kind of shift around town, and that eventually, because of the opportunity of this site, there will be larger, more intense things here at some point. But the main thing, to the point that you were making, is we don't want to shift them out now in hopes of someone coming in the future. We'd love to keep this place active, even if that means, keeping every single use that's there now. Perhaps we could screen them better. Perhaps there's other options for making them more compatible with other kinds of uses. But yes, I don't think everyone is interested in driving out the uses that are there today. Eventually, the market may well do that over time.
Yeah, this particular poll, this particular focus area, the industrial areas, is very different from the others, because the others, we were sort of asking you, do you like these development types? Do we want to code for these types of development? Do we want to add to our code or revise our code so that these types of things will be allowed at all? This question is more about, like, you can't necessarily, we're not going to code for the type of building on the right, because these areas, these sites are typically, or at least in the OCP, where there's existing development, it could be anything. You can't predict what it might be. But what we're asking you is, do you think we should have a district in Concord, which we do not yet now have, that will allow live workspaces for people to have a shop on the first floor and a house up above, or an apartment where is it sort of interacting with the, for instance, with the new brewery or the I cannot remember the name of that place, Smoke Show Barbecue, is that what it is? So I think these can be attractive places that people want to be and engage with the new uses that are there while redeveloping the rest of those sites. And then I've had people ask me about the properties out on Pembroke Road where they want to do stuff like live work, but it's not permitted. It's not permitted in OFP. You're not allowed to live in the OFP district. So the proposal would be create a new district where you could mix these things together and create these types of spaces. So the Whitney Road industrial, that those properties over by the industrial on Pembroke, and I thought this Southern Opportunity Corridor were appropriate locations to say, you know what, you're allowed to mix these things together. We're not putting any like serious industrial stuff like manufacturing things there, but we're allowing light industrial, light warehouse to mix with other types of uses. So that's why this one says keep the same uses or allow new uses. Because the question is really, do we want to create this new district where we can mix these things together?
Lee?
Yes.
It kind of looks like you're recognizing at times that these relatively low value, and not to be derogatory, low value uses are actually going to be driven out of town.
Not necessarily out of town, but to another part of town. Everything ages and whatever.
This is it. I mean, where would they go? Would they go up on Fisherville Road up there in 35?
Well, they might go all the way to Pennacook, for example. There's a lot of land up there and a lot of old buildings. I can tell you that they have shifted all around in Austin. They're all over the place still. after 20 years of doing this, there are still places like this.
Yeah.
And, but they move farther out from the downtown core. They move, you know, around to sections where something else has gotten older, a strip center, something else. So there will be places for this kind of activity, but what there isn't, and that's kind of what Heather's getting at, is there isn't a district that says it's okay to have this kind of not quite perfect, you know, blending of a variety of uses as something that gets used in very special places that you'd like to inject a little life into and a little vibrancy. But yes, I think it's fair to say if this brewery is successful and 4 new restaurants open up down there, pretty soon somebody's going to be looking to do a housing project.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not, again, just to be perfectly clear, no one's suggesting making any of these uses prohibited. So it's really, Lee is talking about market pressure. He's not saying you are zoned out. No, you're not zoned out. It's up to the property owner. If, you know, you tell the property owner, you could put X, you know, millions of dollars worth of development on this site, or you could keep the you know, the car. I'm not sure what this is. I'm not even sure if this is associated with a use or if this is what I'm looking at there, but, or you could keep this here, you know, or you could move this to some land that is underutilized somewhere else that's cheaper because we can get more off of this land due to its location and the development that's occurring around it.
Even
I
simple
mean, there's a
things.
reason this was zoned 20 years ago, OCP, Opportunity Corridor Performance. That's because of its proximity to downtown and its proximity potentially for interconnection. That's why we have road interconnections planned for there. So, I mean, it's not zoned industrial. It's not now zoned industrial. We're suggesting a zoning that allows what's there to continue, but allows other things to happen.
So
Yeah, I wasn't arguing with you about adding flexibility. I was just a little concerned that in years past, one of the reasons for industrial zoning is the land was cheaper. And people were building office projects in there because they could get cheaper land rather than and pushing out the industrial activity. So
yeah,
that's all I'm more
so if
concerned
we
about.
wanted this to be totally industrial, you're right, we would need to protect it. It would need to sit in a sanctuary.
But we would also need to rezone it because everything that's in there is non-conforming uses. This is not a use that is allowed in the OCP district. It's not zoned industrial. I think that's a key point that we're missing here. We're focusing on this area, and what we're suggesting is actually probably potentially going to make more things conforming that are already here. Because right now it is zoned.
I'm not arguing with you, Heather.
Oh no, I know. I'm just getting passionate about it. I don't feel like you're arguing with me.
So where is the industrial? Where are these people going to go?
Well, I would say they could stay right here if they wanted to, but the industrial zones that we
that's
have
not going to
existing,
happen.
the industrial zones that we have existing are on Sheep Davis Road and up, you know, they're mostly Sheep Davis Road. Rivco site is zoned industrial. The Whitney Road area up there, there's a bunch that is still zoned industrial, and we could decide that we don't want to mess with any industrial. You know, the only industrial piece that we are suggesting to rezone is the Whitney Road piece. We're not suggesting touching any other industrially zoned land. Whitney Road is the only industrial zone land that we're suggesting we make this office flex, because rather than heavy manufacturing type stuff based on the grocery store that's going in and all the other uses that are going in, and all of the proposals that we have heard where people have talked about office and housing and other types of things wanting to do on that extension, that's why we are including that here. But we're not suggesting touching any other industrially zoned land in the city. That would not change. So to the extent that these are, at this time, the uses in the OCP are non-conforming because they're not permitted in the OCP district. You know, we would actually most likely be making them more conforming by allowing more of the uses that are already there to continue. It's almost the opposite of what it sounds like I'm hearing your concerns are.
And not to be crazy, but there is more land in Concord. It just doesn't have sewer.
Yeah.
So
we don't want to go there, Lee. Don't touch
Just
our,
saying.
don't touch our RO district.
Just saying. So this has been great. I just wanted to close with offering you guys some other ways to comment if you wanted. If you go to the project website, which is that ConcordNEXT, all one word, .info. If you go to that website, there'll be links to this material. We'll be posting the presentations as they occur. We'll be posting information that summarizes the polls and other things as we get through the set of polls. We have 2 more sessions, one this evening and one again on Thursday night. The one this evening is on Pennacook and Thursday is Loudon.
Yeah, tonight is Fisherville and Thursday's
Okay.
Loudon.
So there's going to be a little bit more focus on the 2 separate places. So we're going to talk mostly about Fisherville tonight and mostly about the Loudon Road area in general on Thursday night. So if you're sending somebody to go listen in and they happen to have more of an interest in one of those areas, you can send them there. You'll see on the left here is an open feedback response form. So you can click away from the website and get to that feedback form. So if you've got a bunch to say, go there. In addition, at the very bottom of that form, if you see that button that says add file, that will allow you to upload pictures of other things that you like from other communities that might fit into these project areas. If you didn't like the examples we were using and have some great examples you'd like to share, we'd love to see them. And eventually you'll be able to see any of the recordings on the website as well. So with that, Heather, any closing thoughts?
I just really want to thank everyone for their participation. The success is really based on the more people that we have. And we do have a few more minutes if anyone just in general wants to offer some feedback or ask a question. Or raise a hand, and we'll call on you. I know most of you, I might call on you anyway.
I almost chimed in earlier when we talked about, providing the option for some of these things to happen, but still allowing the old thing to be built. And I'm looking at that picture of that giant parking lot in Dunkin' Donuts, and if I were driving up Fisherville Road and saw that go in, I think I would barf. I'd be like, why? Like, no. So how much are we going to continue to allow some development that we don't like? And would that prevent some of these innovative things from happening if their neighbors have a big giant parking lot? Are they going to want to be up on the street? Are they going to kind of destroy that sense of place that we like to have? And maybe that has to happen when we update our master plan later. But trying to find that balance between what developers are willing and able to build and be profitable versus what we really want our town to look like.
I think that's part of the purpose of these discussions and these conversations and getting the word out. I think if a critical mass of the community says, you know what, we don't want them to be able to build another Dunkin' Donuts drive-through in that way. Like, we want a Dunkin' Donuts, but we want the drive-through to be in the back, because they do that sometimes. They put it so that it's not part of the, what the community sees firsthand. So, I mean, it really comes down to what council wants to do and what the community is telling council and what the community is telling us. Sometimes these things are done as overlay districts. So, just telling a property owner, hey, we want this. The community, 70% of the community wants this, and this will make a lot more money for you because there's a lot higher density and a lot higher use on the site. There's that level where you're just giving them that option. And then there's that level where you're saying, we don't want that anymore. You have to do this. To me, Concord doesn't strike me as the type of community that would be interested in saying, no, you're not allowed to do that anymore. But it really comes down to what council wants and what the community wants. And so I think part of our challenge is finding that balance, finding that way to do that. For instance, on Loudon Road, your parking is not allowed between the building and the road, right? that was already in place when I got here. Well, drive-through lanes are allowed between the building and the road. So maybe the next step is not to prevent drive-throughs, but to prevent the drive-through lane from being between the building and the road. Maybe we move the building, first, and then the drive-through lane goes somewhere else. So I think there's lots of different steps and options that we can take to at least we want to encourage and move in the right direction towards a new type of development, higher density of development that will, allow the community, more amenities, more places to live and more places to shop.
Let's see, which is,
But I really enjoyed the discussion. So thank you everyone for participating. Again, you can go online to offer more feedback online, or you can just send us an email. And then again, there'll be the 2 other sessions that you can watch, either participate in or watch after the fact. So thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.